right, thanks everybody for being here for the concluding session of today, but this is really, I think, the transitional panel for the whole event. We've spent, since yesterday evening, a lot of time kind of reflecting on the past and kind of foundations of wilderness, of the Wilderness Act. With this discussion that we're about to have, we're going to look forward to the next 50 years, and this is really kicking off a discussion that's going to continue throughout the day tomorrow. And I really hope that you'll all be here again starting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. To see this conversation through and be a part of the discussion that we're going to have beginning with this panel here. It's a real pleasure to be introducing these folks, or just one of these folks, Natalie Dawson. She'll be introducing the rest of the panelists. My name is Zach Porter. I run the Next Gen Wilderness Leaders program for the Montana Wilderness Association here in Missoula, and I've had the privilege of partnering with Natalie Dawson over the last few years, and I'm really hoping that that just continues to grow. I'm a graduate of the Wilderness and Civilization program myself. The program is a interdisciplinary one that many of you, I'm sure, in this room know about or have been a part of. The Wilderness Institute was established here quite a while back, gosh, probably in the 70s, I'm guessing. And Natalie is its newest director and doing just a fantastic job of bringing the Wilderness Institute into the next 50 years of wilderness and connecting Montanans, young Montanans, with their wild public lands. So she's doing a fantastic job, and it's been just great to work with her on a lot of different projects, from getting freshmen out on new wilderness experience trips to working on citizen science efforts around the region. Natalie has a PhD in biology from the University of New Mexico. She is an avid backcountry explorer, a wonderful friend, and I'll hand the microphone over to her. So thanks, Natalie.
Thanks, Zach. I have a tendency to move when I'm on stage, so if I put this in the stand, I might sit still. All right, thank you for that introduction, Zach. Our final panel is going to explore the future of wilderness. How, specifically, do we inspire the next generation of wilderness managers, advocates, artists, writers, dreamers, explorers, those who will become leaders among the topics that we have already discussed in the conference up to this point. And in playing off of our title for the entire conference, Wilderness's Storied Past and Troubled Future, it's true that wilderness has a storied past, a past rich in personal stories, and those of our nation's own adolescents. It's not any coincidence that 1964, which we're celebrating here in this room with the Wilderness Act, also brought us the Civil Rights Act. Yes, there's lots of stories. One story that I'd like to just read quickly from Wilderness comes from wilderness writer Terry Tempest Williams in a place that I've called home for many years in northern Alaska. Quote, "I am unsteady on my feet. Tussocks on the tundra covered in dwarf willow bring me to my knees. My eyes drop down to the level of lichen, and I note the branching of one is reminiscent of another. I look up. I see nothing. I see everything." Stories. We each have them, every one of us in this room. But with this storied past, I would move on to the next portion of our title by asking, is our future truly troubled? Every year, I get the amazing opportunity and gift, it's a true gift, really, to spend time with a new group of students that come here to the University of Montana simply to study wilderness. And I think that it would be difficult for me to think of a troubled future, to face these students every day and say, well, when I look ahead, I see trouble. I probably couldn't do my own job with passion and idealism if I thought that there wasn't yet a time coming, maybe now, where we can challenge what's been done and what's being done on our public lands and for wilderness. It wouldn't be truthful teaching to me if I didn't believe that it's not necessarily troubled and that there is still time to shift paradigms as we move forward into action. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists today, each of whom are coming here with a variety of experiences, and they will be talking about the future. We have Katie Knotek, who's the natural resource specialist on the Nez Perce and Clearwater National Forest, although she just told me she's temporary detailed on the Bitterroot. She's currently serving as Recreation Program Manager on the Bitterroot. She has a bachelor's degree in Recreation Management from the University of Montana and a master's in Recreation Resources with an emphasis in human dimensions of natural resource management from Colorado State University. Katie also serves as Public Information Officer on a Northern Rockies Type 2 Incident Management Team, and she's also Region 1's representative for the U.S. Forest Service Chiefs Wilderness Advisory Group. Our next speaker will be Tristan Perisco, who's a former United States Air Force Explosive Ordnance Disposal Technician and Afghanistan combat veteran, who serves as Montana's Armed Forces community as the Veteran Outreach Coordinator for the Montana Wilderness Association. Tristan provides a lot of opportunities, especially for veterans, to share wilderness experiences, tell stories around the campfire, and be with peers who understand what they have been through. And he's a full-time student here at the university working on his degree in Parks, Tourism, and Rec Management. We then have with us Dylan DesRosier, who grew up in a small town outside of East Glacier on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. He says that the landscape that surrounded his youth grounded him in place and is the foundation of his interest in conservation. Currently, he is in the Resource Conservation Master's Program here at UM. And our final, I think that was a cheer. Our final speaker will be Rick Potts, who's currently the owner of Wildland Conservation and Outdoor Recreation Services, LLC. He's also the former Wilderness Program Manager for the National Park Service, former National Park Service Wilderness Training Manager through the Arthur Carhart Wilderness Training Center. He spent 27 years managing wild landscapes for the National Park Service, and he spent the last 3 years managing 15 proposed wilderness areas in central Montana and the UL Bend. He's also a writing team member for America's Great Outdoors Report. I've had the pleasure to briefly meet each and every one of these people, and I hope that you will be inspired as much as I am by what they're about to share with us. So with that, I'll hand it over to Katie.
Okay, I've never used one of these before, so the boys just taught me how to use it. First of all, I want to say that we are here to inspire you guys about the future, and I would think that Tristan and Dylan are right here with me saying that we are going to challenge the notion, like Natalie said, that our future is troubled. I don't want to believe that about myself or these folks or the younger generation that we are mentoring. You may think we are the youth, but we're mentoring other folks coming up, just like Natalie said, who are passionate about wilderness. And so Zach Porter, Mr. Zach Porter, invited each of us to speak on this panel, and I think why he chose us is to tell a little bit about our stories and how we got to where we are and being part of the wilderness movement in history. I grew up in eastern Washington in the Palouse land, which is farmland, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. Most of you probably are. And I grew up playing in the foothills of the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness, which is where I am so blessed to work now. I do think the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness is awe-inspiring and one of the most spectacular wilderness areas in the lower 48, contrary to things we heard previously. And it is 50 years old, which I've been celebrating as many times as I can this summer with cakes and cupcakes and whatever, and we'll keep celebrating. And anyway, so it's really a privilege for me to get to be a wilderness manager in this place that I grew up playing around in when I was a kid. I came to University of Montana actually through running. I was a student athlete here on the track and cross country teams. And luckily I ended up at University of Montana, because when I was choosing where I wanted to go to school, I was focused on where I wanted to run, not necessarily study. But fortunately, my brother was in the School of Forestry, the School of Forestry at University of Montana, which I will always call it that, since I actually graduated from the School of Forestry, not the College of Conservation, blah, blah, blah. My brother was going to School of Forestry, and he was majoring in fisheries biology. And for kids who grew up in Eastern Washington, yet were exposed to the outdoors, we'd never heard of School of Forestry before, and that sounded really cool. So I followed my brother over here to Montana to study in the School of Forestry, and chose right from the beginning that my major was going to be recreation management. And unlike a lot of freshmen, I stuck with that major to the end, and I'm glad I did. So from, I fell in love with my major, obviously, while I was here at University of Montana. And a lot of actually my mentors are here in this room, or were at the time. I have been today and last night. I'm not sure exactly who's here now, but so I've been impacted by a lot of people, and I feel privileged to be up here speaking in front of you guys. And those folks have all influenced me at different points in the things that they've said to me. And Wayne Frymond was one of the professors here, was my advisor, and I really enjoyed him mentoring me in my years going through school. And one thing that I remember him saying to me when I was a senior and we were taking our senior trip around the state of Montana was that I was too naive, and that I needed to be more critical of what was around me, that I needed to, I just saw everything as rosy and great with these speakers that we were listening to in the national park, at Glacier, or I don't even remember all the places we went to, it doesn't really matter. But I thought, man, really? I need to be more critical? And now for folks who know me, probably think I need to be less critical. But anyways, some of those folks in the program really influenced me being able to be a student athlete and be able to get a degree in recreation management and be an athlete at the same time. Perry Brown, who was the dean of the School of Forestry at that time, every year we'd have a student athlete academic banquet for the top scholar athletes. And I was fortunate enough to be recognized in that banquet every year, and Perry was always there as my dean supporting me, which was pretty cool. And on that same trip where Wayne made that comment to me, I remember him dropping me off on the side of the road in Three Forks because my cross-country team was coming to pick me up to take me to the next race. So I really appreciate them helping make it happen. But when I came to my last year of school, I chose to do 5 years, even though I finished my recreation management degree in 4 because I was an athlete and had a 5th year of eligibility. And I was starting to think about grad school, and was thinking about environmental philosophy. And I sat down with Bill Borey and had a conversation in his office, and I remember him telling me, if you're gonna think about environmental philosophy, you might want to take some philosophy classes and see what you really think about that. So I said, okay. So my senior year, I had to do my practicum in recreation management and I had the ability to take more classes. I already had a minor in sociology, but I decided to go to school part-time in philosophy and get an additional minor in philosophy, and then I interned with the Aldo Leopold Wilderness Research Institute, which was part of my biography that I didn't have Natalie speak about, but is also very important in my roots. And after a year of taking philosophy classes, which were really challenging, like from Professor Preston that I mentioned earlier, I decided that I wanted to stay in natural resources but try to bring philosophy into what I was doing, because I still was really passionate about philosophy, because obviously wilderness is very philosophical, as we've been learning about. And so I moved from there to Colorado State University to pursue my master's degree. And like Natalie said, my emphasis was in human dimensions of natural resource management. I took a class from Holmes Rolston, and so he is not allowed to ask me any questions because I did pass his environmental philosophy class already, and one of the toughest classes I ever took. But really fortunate to study under somebody like him. After graduating from Colorado State, I moved back to Montana and was fortunate enough to get hired on with the Leopold Institute in a term position, which the Leopold Wilderness Research Institute is, for folks who don't know, the only wilderness research institute in the United States. And they're under the umbrella of Forest Service Research Branch, but they do research for all the federal agencies that manage wilderness in the United States, and they do research across the country. And so I was hired on and funded mostly through money from the National Park Service to help with backcountry management planning in Alaska. And I worked for Alan Watson and Carol Miller, who are two amazing people that have really influenced me. And I was fortunate enough to go and do research in Gates of the Arctic and Denali and Wrangell-St. Elias, our biggest wilderness area in the nation. Exposure to really awesome, wild, raw places. In Denali, I was sent to the base camp in Mount McKinley to interview climbers as they came back from their expedition on the mountain, fresh from their expedition on the mountain. Climbers from all over the world. If their English was well enough to speak to me, then I was able to interview them, and it was an amazing experience that I'll never forget. I also did research projects on wilderness fire, which I'm very passionate about. For as much as wilderness is controversial and philosophical, so is fire. And when you bring those two things together, it just makes for something really awesome. And so I spent a lot of time in that arena as well. And then I was able, I spent 4 years with the Leopold Institute in 2 different term positions, and then I moved into management with the Forest Service, where I'm currently at, on the Powell Ranger Station in Idaho in the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest. And like I said, I'm one of the wilderness managers of the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness. And then currently I'm in a detail on the Bitterroot National Forest. And what is really great about my job right now, besides obviously getting to be a steward of the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness and getting to be a part of its history, which I was thinking about the other night. I was writing a post on Facebook about the SBW's birthday and just the fact that I've worked up there for 8 years now, and so I am a piece of that 50 years of history in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness. And so are the people that I work with, which I have been super fortunate, like Natalie, to get to work with students and that next generation that's coming up. We have some really awesome partnerships. One is with the Montana Conservation Corps, and another one's with the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation, both of which are have offices here in Missoula. And with the Montana Conservation Corps, we have, we always have several crews that work in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness, but one program that's really unique is we have an immersion crew that lives in the wilderness for the summer and does trail work. And it's really neat to see in both of these programs, kids come from all over the country to come to Montana to be a part of these programs and to work in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness. And it's disheartening for me to hear comments and things like we've heard today, and you often hear about how sad our youth are because they're all plugged in and because they live in these cities, and these are the kids that are coming out here to work in wilderness. And they're not sad and they're not troubled, they're awesome. And they're being exposed to wilderness and their lives are being changed. And we get to see that happen, which is so cool. So that's one program. And then with the foundation, we have wilderness ranger interns, we have trail crews, we have trail liaisons. And I want to share a story from one of my interns this year, and actually one of them is here. And I got to speak to another one from last year earlier today. But these guys spend the summer with us, and we had 4 young men from different places across the country, one from University of Montana, but the other ones were from other places, come and spend their summer with us. And on their last hitch of the season, 2 of them went out on their own. Lots of times we send them with wilderness rangers or with one of our permanent employees, but they were on their own. And Patrick, the one who's here from University of Montana, and myself and my wilderness ranger were hanging out in our office, just chit-chatting and killing time. You know, they were telling me about their time in the woods, and we were waiting for Kenny and Ben to come back, who became really good friends. And Kenny is from Humboldt State University, and Ben's from New York. And, you know, they came from opposite sides of the country and became best friends in their experience this summer in the SBW. So we knew when they came back that they were going to have some tale to tell us. And, of course, when they walk into the room, the energy just, like, ignites. So you guys probably remember, like, mid-August, we were having a lot of storms, thunderstorm activity, and they were out in the heart of that at a really high elevation area, deep in the SBW, and at Frog Lake, just beneath Frog Peak. And I'll relay some of their comments, because it reminded me when Pat Williams last night said that his first experience in wilderness was startling. That's how these guys explained it to me. So Kenny comes in and is like, "Oh my gosh, you will not believe what happened to us out there." And we immediately are like, okay, this is going to be good. "It was so crazy. That storm was just gnarly." And Ben's like, "Yeah, we had to get inside of our tents, and we were down in the fetal position, and it was raining so hard, and there was lightning all around." And Ben's like, "I thought I was gonna die, and I wasn't ready to die yet." And Kenny's like, "We were talking to each other between our tents, and it was raining so hard, and the lake, we were looking out at the lake, and it looked like the water was levitating because there was no difference between the rain coming down and the water from the lake." And Adam and I, my wilderness ranger, and Patrick are just like sitting back, smiling, you know, just like I am now, because we all know, you know, what they're talking about. We've all had that experience where nature just like impacted us so powerfully. And, you know, those guys will never forget it. And I, just like Natalie, I get to hear stories like that all the time from these kids, and I love it. And then just real quick, I want to, because I know I'm going to run out of time, I want to say another thing that we talked about as part of what I'm doing now is I am the Region 1 representative for the Chief of the Forest Service Wilderness Advisory Group, which is a really cool thing that I want to share with you guys, because it's a national group of wilderness managers, and there's one representative from each of the regions of the Forest Service, which there's 9 regions across the country. And we have a direct tie to the Chief of the Forest Service. And so we have a program of work that we work on in the wintertime. Typically, we try not to do work during the field season, because we're all really dedicated to our field program. But we try to work on things that are really pressing field issues and bring those attention to the chief so that he knows what we're dealing with in the wilderness program. And some of the things that we've been able to work on have been the Chief's 10-year Wilderness Stewardship Challenge, which was initiated by Chief Bosworth and is coming to an end at the end of 2014. We're required to report on our final results at the end of this month, and then the results are going to be announced at the 50th anniversary conference in Albuquerque. And in following up on the Chief's Tenure Challenge, we have been able to be a part of what's coming next. We've been calling it What Comes Next Forever. And finally now it's a new performance measure for the wilderness program for the Forest Service. And we're calling it Wilderness Stewardship Monitoring, and it's going to go hand in hand with Wilderness Character Monitoring, and that is the future of wilderness management in the Forest Service. Another really important thing that I kind of want to leave this with that we've been working on is what we call a broken career ladder in the Forest Service, and is super disheartening for somebody like me who has graduated, has degrees from two of the premier wilderness academic universities in the country, University of Montana and Colorado State. A lot of people like myself and these guys who are coming out of these programs are not qualifying for wilderness and recreation management jobs in the Forest Service, and I don't know about the other federal agencies, and it's because our academic curriculum in these programs is not aligning with these job series. If I didn't have a master's degree from Colorado State, I probably would not qualify for the job I'm in with my degree from University of Montana. And that's because they don't recognize our recreation management classes as science classes. They don't recognize our social science classes as science classes. And it's the natural sciences, or what you like to call the hard sciences, biology, chemistry, things like that, that we have to have a certain amount of accreditation in to be able to qualify for these positions. And that is a major problem that we're taking on and trying to get attention to at the level of the chief. But it's something that our universities should take pretty seriously too, and figure out how we can get more in alignment, because if we think we're training the next generation and they can't qualify for these positions, it's not a good thing.
So this is a rather slightly more informal than the last panels have been. That's why we're all sitting down, except Rick is going to use the microphone up here. But we're just going to move through, and everyone has 10 to 15 minutes. And then at the end, we're going to open it up for questions all at once.
Cool. Well, first off, I'd just like to say that I'm really thankful to be here, and I'm thankful that all you guys are here as well. I'd also like to start with a quote from one of my mentors on campus, Josh Lotnick, who's a professor in the Environmental Studies Department. Probably lots of you know him. And I think it applies to wilderness advocacy pretty well. And that is, when you mix humble labor with tangible results, you get a transformative experience. And I think when that humble labor occurs outside, you get a sense of place. I grew up in a pretty powerful place. The town of East Glacier is quite small. To the north and west is East Glacier, or the entire park of Glacier National Park, and to the south and west is the Badger 2 Med and the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, and to the east is the Great Plains and the rest of the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. And it's a different experience growing up in a place where I've literally stood in places where my grandmothers, 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 on and on for generations, might have stood in the exact same place. And so when you get that multi-generational presence on a landscape, I think you have a different connection to place. So in some ways, I think I was maybe predetermined a little bit to have an appreciation for that place and wildlands, but in a lot of ways, I attribute my sense of wilderness advocacy to education. And I think through that education, there was a series of bridges that connected my love for being outside with an awareness or an appreciation for the politics and the legal structures that overlay these wild landscapes. And one of the biggest was going through the Wilderness and Civilization program on campus. I think that program, I mean, just on a general level was incredible. You get to start off the program with a 10-day backpacking trip in the Bob Marshall for credit, and being able to go through that with kids that you've never met before from all over the place was invaluable. And it also immerses you in a culture of learning about wildlands and learning about the people that interact with them, and also the management structures that are on the landscape as well. And I think the Wilderness and Civilization program was really valuable in that way. Another bridge in my life was certainly working for the Park Service. I worked for Glacier National Park doing trail work, humble labor outside for 5 summers, and I wouldn't trade it. Just being able to hike and explore areas of Glacier Park that I'd never been before, even though I grew up right there, it was a lot of fun. A lot of work, but a lot of fun. I think the third bridge really was being able to witness and work with the start of the Montana Wilderness Association student group on campus. And being able to witness the start and be involved with the start of that student group was really valuable as well. And it's really been cool to see, I think the student group's been going on for 4 years, really cool to see it progress and evolve and witness both myself and the other people that have gone through it gain a passion for wilderness areas and Montana and learning about Montana, and also gain a passion for canvassing and lobbying and the political world out there as well. So I think that was a really key part of my wilderness advocacy. And I think thinking about all three of those, I think the foundation of those is just being able to get outside. I think that is what can't be overstated, is the importance of getting outside and seeing these places, and that is what truly gives you a appreciation for place. I mean, before I took, a 10-day backpacking trip in the Bob, I was aware that it was there, but hiking through there and seeing the landscape, really, I'll never forget it. And I think that was really cool. When I think about the future of wilderness advocacy, I think that there's a definite need to diversify and an opportunity to diversify too, both politically and ethnically, as far as the movement goes. I mean, the history of the environmental movement and wilderness movement has not necessarily been the most diverse. And in Montana, I think embracing diversity means embracing American Indian tribes and Native youth, and thinking of that in a way that it's a really a cross-political exchange and an opportunity for learning on both sides, and a need for it for sure. I would love to see more of a commitment, or what that entails would be a commitment of time, of resources, and energy and enthusiasm. And I think it would be empowering for both parties. I'd love to see that happen. I think one of the last things I want to say is being here last night was really fun, because to listen to those guys who are truly wilderness legends and have lived their life, have been involved and been advocates for 50 years, and still see how much enthusiasm they have and how much humor they have as well. I think that's what makes wilderness advocacy resilient over time, is enthusiasm and humor. And I'd like to see it continue. Thanks.
I'm going to try to explain my connection and how I feel about wilderness, but it's going to be hard to do because I honestly don't completely understand it. When I was really young, some of my earliest memories are my dad taking me out into wild places, and that continued till I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I started going out there on my own and seeing what kind of trouble I could get into. During my teenage years, I lived in a one-room cabin on top of the Garnet Mountain Range for a couple years, a place where we had to snowmobile in during the winter and snowshoe and ski and hunt and do all sorts of stuff, kind of carve out our own little life. And all that experience living in wild lands and just kind of being a wild type of person, I guess, it really formed an experiential and emotional bond to wild places. And then I also started to discover a real primal bond to wild places. I guess I'd tell you a story that would help explain that. A year or two ago, I was scouting for elk for my wife and minding my own business, and this rattlesnake come out of the grass and tried to bite me. Well, back up a little. I was walking down the trail, and off to my left, I just heard, and I've never heard a rattlesnake rattle in my entire life at that point. And it really didn't even rattle. But something in my brain, something from millions of years ago, told me to jump out of the way. And I did, and I turned around, looked at my partner, and he was real pale white, and I said, "Hey, was that a snake?" And he was kind of sickly looking, and he goes, "Oh yeah, it just about bit you in the leg." And that was a real epiphany for me that everybody, whether they know it or not, has a connection to wilderness that they may or may not even be aware of. I killed that snake, and I ate it with some butter and lemon pepper. But anyways, after a while, I came out of the mountains, went to high school, graduated, and I thought, hey, I'll join the military. That sounds like a good idea and a lot of fun. So I did, and I wanted to do something a little challenging, so I became a explosive ordnance disposal technician. We're responsible for stuff like roadside bombs and different things like that. And next thing I know, I'm in Afghanistan. Now I don't want to give you the wrong idea. Like, I really enjoyed myself there. It was a good time, and it was also a really horrible time. But the landscape there is really brown, not a lot of vegetation. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, man, this would be a lot more fun if this place was more like Montana. And I was always thinking about the wilderness back here. Anyways, while I was over there, some really bad stuff happened. In fact, tomorrow is the 5th anniversary of my best friend got killed while we were there. A sniper got him. So I wasn't in the best of places coming back from that. And I really had trouble finding any peace, but the places I did find peace were wild places, especially up here in Montana. So after a while, I got out of the military and started coming to college here, which that was a whole new experience. And I met up with Zach Porter, and we started up a little program called the Veteran Outreach Program through the Montana Wilderness Association. So what I do now is I try to get as many veterans out in the wild as I can. Zach and I work real hard at this. And my drive to do that is how much wilderness areas helped me when I came back. And I certainly don't speak for all veterans. I don't know if it helps anybody else, but I sure hope it does, and it's something I really enjoy sharing. This last summer we had 5 different groups of veterans out in the wilderness. And I think of all the participants of them groups, only 2 of them were native Montanans. Everybody else came from other places. And it's my understanding that they all moved here because of the wild lands Montana has to offer. Bless you. Lost my train of thought. Anyways, even the guys that were from Montana hadn't been in a lot of these wilderness areas. And that was a bit of a surprise to me, and it dawned on me how important it was to get people that haven't been in these awe-inspiring places and get them to experience it. It was stated last night. Last night was a great panel, by the way, if you weren't here. But it was stated last night that there's 2 kinds of people. There's people that 100% support wilderness, and there's people that 100% do not support it. And I'll humbly disagree with that and say there's a third type of people, and that's people that have no idea wilderness exists. And I think that is the most important group to target when it comes to wilderness advocacy, is to get those people out there to experience wilderness. And that's what I'm trying to do. Thanks.
That one's on if you want it.
Thanks. When I listen to these 3, it just fills me with hope. I think, troubled future? What troubled future? The wilderness system is in good hands. About 15 years ago or so in my career, I got real concerned about the apparent disconnect of fewer and fewer young people stepping up, and I was managing large wilderness areas and backcountry areas. And at first we thought we were doing a really good job with Leave No Trace, because these campsites are looking really good. And then Ken Cordell starts coming out with data showing that overnight backcountry use has dropped off about 26% in just the last short generation. And that's not on a per capita basis, that's real numbers. And that was deeply disturbing to me because we're getting ready to pass the torch, and who are we going to pass it to? And so I got real interested in trying to connect the next generation, the millennial generation, because when you look at the demographic pulses in this country, the baby boomers were about 77 million strong. But Gen Y, the millennials, are 85 million. And what a force they could be if they would just step up and get engaged right now. And back 5 or 6 years ago, there was a popular song, Waiting on the World to Change. Some of you probably had it as your ringtone on your cell phone. And it had lyrics like, we're just going to kind of lay back and wait for all the old people to die, then we're going to inherit the keys to the kingdom, and then our generation will rule the population. Well, that's a cute ditty, but that's not how it works. You don't just slack off until the old people die. Number one, most of us boomers have kept ourselves in reasonable shape, and so we're not going to be dying anytime soon. And the next thing is, old people seem to be like a renewable, inexhaustible resource. Whenever one dies, another one steps up to take their place. So if you guys want to be part of the solution, you need to step up now. And so 5 years ago, was anyone here for the Children in Nature Summit in Missoula that was held here on campus about 5 years ago? Yeah, and I had a chance to keynote that, and I formed up a think tank called Mobilize Gen Ys with about 35 millennial-aged people from across the country, all who have stepped up and said, we want to be part of the solution right now. We're not waiting on the world to change. We want to change the world. So they got together, and one of the things they did was they coined the term Outdoor Nation. And they created a platform There would be a peer-to-peer web-based platform, and then we took that to the Outdoor Industry Foundation, and they funded it, and they created what's now OutdoorNation.org. And OutdoorNation.org is a peer-to-peer way for millennials to talk to each other about how to get outside. How do I backpack? How do I rock climb? How do I do this or do that? Whatever you want to do, there's a support group that can help you do it. So these are ways that you need to reach out. And we're not starting from scratch. You know, we heard last night, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. There have been so many people in the trenches for so many years. You know, Pat Williams and Perry Brown and Bill Cunningham and Smoke Elser last night. That was just so inspirational. And those guys, you know, for more than 50 years with other people like Howard Zahniser, who was the principal author of the Wilderness Act and shepherded it through 66 rewrites in 8 years. It killed him. It literally killed him before the Wilderness Act was signed. Howard Zahniser passed away. But we have so much momentum, and now it's time to step up and carry on the great work that these men and women have done. Pat mentioned that the public support for wilderness was overwhelming. Congress voted like 434 to 1. There was one dissenting vote, and he mentioned it was a congressman from Texas. Well, his name was Joe Poole from Texas. And the legend still lives back in Washington, D.C. And I can tell you, if you're an elected official, 434 to 1 is not where you want to be. Because every reporter in the nation was descended on Joe Poole's office, and his staff held or so the legend goes. His staff held an emergency meeting and said, Joe, how are we going to get out of this? You were the only one, 434 to 1. What can we do? How are you going to survive this? You know, you're going to be slaughtered. And one of the strategists said, Joe, there's only one way out of this. You've got to tell the reporters that you didn't vote for the Wilderness Act because it just didn't go far enough in protecting our nation's wildland heritage. Well, as I look at the title for this, 50 Years Young, Training and Inspiring the Next Generation of Supporters and Leaders, if you do all those permutations, we actually have like 4 assignments. And we don't have time to do all that. So I need to get a quick hand check. Can I see a show of hands? Is there anyone here who is not inspired by the idea of wilderness? Great. Edward Abbey said, wilderness needs no defense. It just needs more defenders. So we can kind of gloss over this part. This shouldn't take very long. So what our assignment then really is, how do we collectively inspire others to get excited about wilderness as we are? And it's a fact. I've never seen any data on this, but I kind of know. It's a fact that many people who love wilderness are kind of introverted by nature. They seek these places because they're quiet and they can enjoy solitude. And one of the hardest things for wilderness lovers to do is to stand up and testify, I love wilderness, and I would like more of it, please. And I would like it to be better funded, please. It is so difficult for us to do. It's not our nature, but in our democracy, silence is not an option. You have got to stand up. You have got to testify. You have got to speak up. Back in 2005 at the World Wilderness Congress up in Alaska, Ian Player challenged a group of wilderness managers from across the country. Ian Player was that great South African wilderness advocate who worked with the Zulu people to help create a lot of the wilderness areas and national parks in South Africa. And, oh, by the way, along the way, played a big role in destroying the apartheid system that was in place in South Africa for so many years. Ian Player said, you wilderness managers just sit here and talk up to yourselves. You need to go out. You need to gather people around your campfires. You need to find your voices. You need to share your stories. You need to share your passion. And that's a challenge I will extend onto each and every one of you as Ian Player extended it to us. Okay, so another question. How many of you are pursuing a career in wilderness stewardship? You're either in one or you would like to be in one, and you're looking for some tips about how to get started. There's quite a few. I'm going to give you a few tips quickly on some of my experiences and observations. And one of the key ones is that wilderness, because we invented it, it's a product of the American mind that we codified into law, and it's an overlay system on top of existing federal lands. There are many, many, many facets of wilderness management. And it takes a broad community of disciplines and specialties to care for the wilderness areas. And you very likely may have a job in which you care for wilderness that doesn't have the W word in your job title, in your job description. And that's okay. There is no single path, but there are many paths. And that's really good news as you try to get a job related to protecting our wilderness areas. As Katie had alluded to, it's really tough going head on, through a rec and tourism program in wilderness and then trying to get a job as a wilderness ranger. There are very few of them in the country. That doesn't mean you cannot be an active participant in stewarding wilderness areas. You might be a wilderness ranger, you might be a recreation planner, you might also be a climatologist or a landscape restoration specialist or a botanist. You might be a traditional skills practitioner or a wildlife biologist or a fisheries manager. You might be a cultural resources specialist or a fire ecologist or a firefighter or a fire manager. Maybe you'll be a teacher or a professor or a mediator or a facilitator or a collaborative planet process leader. Maybe you'll be a writer. Maybe you'll be a poet, a singer, a musician, a painter, a religious leader. Maybe you'll design or sell outdoor gear. Maybe you'll be a member of an organization working to protect our wilderness areas. Maybe you'll be a social worker or that community organizer who helps their city take a vacant lot down in urban areas and convert it into a patch of green grass to give those urban kids their initial green spot experience. And maybe one of those kids will turn out to be the next Bob Marshall. Maybe you'll be an orthopedic surgeon who helps put wilderness adventurers back together by giving them new hips and new knees so that they can go continue their wilderness enjoyment and then contribute generously to the Montana Wilderness Association. Maybe you'll be a lawyer or a rancher or a logger or a miner or a legislator or an outfitter or a guide. Maybe you'll be a bureaucrat, which is usually pronounced as if someone just bit into something really untasty. But I can tell you, I was a bureaucrat for over 30 years. And humble work that produces tangible results is an honorable profession. Maybe you'll be a bureaucrat. Cowboys and hippies, we've got room for them all in the wilderness tent. There's a role for you to play. But whatever you do, and even if you don't pursue wilderness stewardship as a career, become an informed citizen, because more than ever in the 21st century, thoughtful discourse is urgently needed to chart the course for the future of management of our wilderness areas. Personally, when I was finishing up my master's degree in wildlife, I co-founded and chaired a Sierra Club group in north central Pennsylvania to lobby for wilderness designation in the Allegheny Forest and also to help regulate the oil and gas development, which was fairly rampant back there. And I was at a period of time when a guy named Ronald Reagan had just been elected president, and he appointed a guy named James Watt as Secretary of Interior. And James Watt was the most wrong-headed man I have ever known. And he was one of the key spark plugs for the Sagebrush Rebellion, which we're hearing about again today, 30 years later. Funny how these things never go away for good. But back then, like today, it was really difficult to get a job as a wildlife ecologist, particularly with the feds. And so my advice to you, and I got advice from a guy named John Carish, who was the regional chief scientist for the Park Service back, he was stationed in Penn State. He said, you got to start somewhere and you got to do something. You might not be exactly where you want to be, and you might not be doing exactly what you had been trained to do, but get into the system. Start somewhere, do something. And I did that, and I would encourage you to do the same. So my first assignment was at Gettysburg National Military Park in Pennsylvania, and I was working a team of percher and draft horses as a historical farmer on the Gettysburg battlefield. And I showed up for work for the National Park Service, an agency of the Department of Interior, with my "I know Watt's wrong" bumper sticker on my car. And James Watt was my new boss, but he only lasted another month or two, because that kind of wrong-headed thinking, that devolution of the federal public lands, cannot stand. It couldn't stand then, and it won't stand now. As you go through and vote accordingly, wouldn't it be great, here's kind of an aside, Montana's only got about 1 million people, but Montana and Alaska, another small population state, figured out long ago that you can be disproportionately influential in our federal system if you vote smartly your senators and representative. Wouldn't it be cool to get a senator like who's just about to turn 35 and send her back, elect her at the earliest possible age and then send her back for her whole 40-year career? Imagine the chairmanship of the committees it's just hypothetical. Whatever you do in your academic career, those of you who are still in school, you got to really challenge yourself. You got to take some courses that are really distasteful to some of you. They're really tough. I went through the whole pre-med. My undergrad was pre-med, and then I got into wildlife management. And because there are so many of you for so few jobs, the cream will rise to the top. And so you've got to challenge yourself to be the best that you can be. Take the toughest courses that you can handle and do the best that you can do on them. And prepare yourself. Don't worry about minimum requirements for a job. You'll end up on an applicant pool of 500 people. Take as many courses as you can take. Broaden your educational base as much as you can. And as you prepare for either your career in wilderness or just as a wilderness advocate, recognize that no wilderness is large enough to be wholly self-contained. This means there's a whole plethora of jobs beyond the wilderness boundary. A lot of really important wilderness work takes place outside the wilderness boundary, and that's critical to understand. And that really got hit home for me when I went up to Katmai, and I was responsible for managing 4.7 million acres of the wildest land in the country, in the world. Twice the size of Yellowstone, no roads. This is going to be easy, right? And then came that day in March of 1989 when the good Captain Hazelwood drove his boat onto a reef and the Exxon Valdez ruptured and creamed the coast of Katmai with tens of millions of gallons of crude oil. Up until that point, people thought Katmai was big enough and remote enough to take care of itself. But the truth of the matter is, most of the big problems in wilderness originate outside the boundary. And that's where we need to work for solutions. The solutions lie with people. We heard some talk last night that recreation is not the most important purpose of wilderness. And I would agree with that. The Wilderness Act says wilderness shall be devoted to 6 public purposes. Recreation is one. But what I will submit to you is that people, wilderness as we invented it, is of the people, by the people, for the people. We invented it. We made it up. And people are the solution to our wilderness problems. They're not the problem. They are the solution. And with all apologies to David Thoreau, or Henry David Thoreau, and people is the preservation of the wilderness. And I really believe that. Today, no better day to remind ourselves of the importance of wilderness areas. Today, September 11th. Was anyone else in a wilderness area on September 11th, 2001? I was. Deep in the heart of the Bob, Smoke was. We felt at peace. We felt safe. We felt secure. We were reminded again that wilderness is not an amenity in our society. It's an absolute necessity. Several weeks later, I was helping an outfitter buddy get ready to pack in on an elk hunt into the Bob, 10-day elk hunt. This group of guys showed up up at Jack Rich's place up in Sealy Lake, and they were just fried. And I said, what's it with these guys? I mean, they looked like zombies. I mean, they're just lifeless. And turned out they were emergency room physicians from New York City who had just gone through the most unimaginable horror that anyone could face, trying to patch people back together for weeks. And they rode into the wilderness. And 10 days later, they came out reborn, recreated, new people. That's the power of the wilderness. That's the responsibility you all are stepping up to inherit. Thanks.
All right, so we have about 15 minutes left for questions, and I have some prepared if no one will step up to the mic, but we would all rather hear from the audience. And you're willing to ask one or all of us a question. No one asked the question, I'm going to call on one of my students. There's a couple here.
I'll save one of your students. Last week I was in Prescott, Arizona with 25 students in roughly their early to mid-20s from around the country, gathered for a student congress. And one of them, relatively early in the week, said that the concept of wilderness does not really resonate with her generation. And I wondered, I think maybe everyone here is older than that, but somewhat close. I'd particularly like to hear from the three of you in the middle. What would you say to that person?
I would tell her she obviously hasn't experienced it. Like that story that I shared, how could you say it doesn't resonate with our generation? Just come to my office on any Thursday, second week of a pay period, and you'll hear how it's resonating with our generation.
Unfortunately, I think she's kind of right. And it's not that it doesn't resonate because it's not something they wouldn't enjoy or anything like that. It's not resonating because they have no idea it exists. That's why it's important to get those young folks out there, or at least show them that it exists through some other means.
I agree. I would say if she doesn't think it resonates, she hasn't seen enough. She needs to see more, and everyone does.
And it's also, unfortunately, why we need to reluctantly get involved with Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. You all think we're all plugged in, but I didn't even get internet in my house until the summer. Still don't own a computer, but I do have a smartphone, and it is important for us to engage in social media to share pictures and stories and engage the other folks of our generation.
I would just follow up by saying that that's a great question that I feel like we should all continually ask ourselves for those of us who are active in wilderness right now. Because what the 50th anniversary has done is it's created a series of parties. And I've gone to many of these celebrations across the state of Montana, and I've seen the same people, and I've seen relatively few young people, and most of the young people I've seen I know through the University of Montana programs, of which I've only been a part of for a few years. And so I wonder what it would look like in other parts of the country where there are these celebrations going on. And if we're seeing a small number of young people at our celebrations in Montana, where we're very closely, in a very geographic sense, proximate to wilderness. It shocks me, to be completely honest. One of the reasons why the university started a freshman program to get freshman students out in the wilderness is because one day I was walking behind two students, and one of them said to the other, "I'm about to graduate from UM next week." This was in May, not this past May, but the year before the program started. He said, "I'm about to graduate, and I've never hiked up to the M." And I thought, okay, we have to get some people out walking.
Well, and we also have work to do amongst our peers too, and in these different institutions that we work within. I was shocked when I was speaking amongst some of my peers at a meeting for work in the Forest Service, and I kept referring to the SBW. And after the meeting, one of them asked me, "What's the SBW?" And I'm thinking, seriously? Are you kidding? You don't know what the Selway Bitter Wilderness is? I mean, she'd never heard that term, I guess, you know. But our forest, the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest, huge forest in Idaho, north central Idaho. We help steward parts of four different wilderness areas. We have leaders who do not know what the term MRDG stands for, which is Minimum Requirement Decision Guide that you use for an analysis for wilderness. Every leader, every specialist in our institution should know about. So yeah, there's things that are shocking, but it's not reason to lose hope. It's just reason to push forward.
There's a lot of young people in this crowd, and given the crowd, I don't know if I'll get any response. Was there anybody in here that hasn't been in a wilderness area? Awesome.
You know, if they say wilderness doesn't resonate, I might say try some different terms. Try earth. Do you kind of want to get back to the earth, or do you think of yourself as belonging to earth, or something like that? You might go that direction. You might say, you might try the term wonder. Do you want me to take you a place where I guarantee you'll do some wondering? See what response you get to that. You might try the term spirit. Now, students don't want to be religious, but they still like to think, well, just ask them, what kind of spirit have you got, right? And then say, well, do you want me to take you to a place where you're going to think some deep thoughts about the meaning of life? Or try the term self-reliance. I'd ask these students who don't know anything about, would you like to be self-reliant? Would you like to be free? And then say, well, I got a place you can go where I guarantee you will become more self-reliant. And when you come out, you'll be freer than when you went in. I think there's some ways you can get into the bloodstream of students who don't think much about wilderness.
And wild. Who doesn't want to be wild, right? Not all of us are introverts. Some of us are extroverts, Rick. You know, Wild Fest at Sealy Lake last weekend was awesome. There was, you know, close to 2,000 people there. And for those of us who are too young to have partaken in Woodstock, we've just heard awesome stories about it. My friends and I were referring to it as Wild Stock. And talking about how Bob Marshall is definitely looking down on us, smiling at us dancing to the music, the Mission Mountain Wood Band, drinking Bodacious Bob beer. It was good times. Wild. We all want to be wild.
Chris, I also think your question or that comment is evidence that we also need to start younger, too. And kids, at that point, if they already feel that it's not relevant, to me that's evidence that we need to start younger and get kids that are, really young outside and have more programs and education for youth, really younger youth.
I think that solitude is one of these really valuable things that the wilderness has for people and users of the resource. But I think that also prevents us from perhaps sharing it with other people because we want it to be this place where we can go and really be alone. So I was wondering what you guys thought about how do we involve more people but still preserve these specific solitude and kind of this being super alone in the wilderness, which is super important for me when I go, and that kind of thing.
Become a wilderness ranger in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness. Mr. Zach Porter, which I like to call him because I think it's funny that he's being introduced that way since he was one of my wilderness rangers. And we all remember him as the guy with the yellow Crocs. But one thing that Zach talked to me about when he was a wilderness ranger was before he came to the Selway Bitterroot, he was a ranger in Washington, a lot more heavily used wilderness area. And he was like, wow, you guys here focus on managing, stewarding the resource, nature, not on managing people. Because these guys, my wilderness rangers, can go out for a whole hitch, which is typically 10 days, 9, 10 days, whatever, and not see anybody. And maybe not in the Bitterroot National Forest side of the SBW, but the Idaho side is still awesome and remote and full of solitude. So,
I guess to rephrase myself better would be to say that how do we get people who are concerned about losing solitude excited about promoting the idea of wilderness and become wilderness advocates themselves? I see I'm a wilderness ranger in the Ansel Adams down in California, and I see a more the user group is a lot more older people, and then we sometimes will see Outward Bound. But besides that, it's kind of missing a generational gap. But I'm also not sure on how to get people who I've heard that say people are the problem so many times. It's we are the problem, people are the problem. How do we get people like that to be excited about advocating wilderness and sharing it with people while still being able to have their solitude and their things about wilderness that they really like?
I guess I got a pretty simple answer is maybe divide your time. Yeah. When you take people out and you really start seeing light bulbs click about how great wilderness is, you might decide that's not such a bad thing to take other people out and then go out on your own on the other times.
And I'll just add, in addition to the obvious, create more wilderness areas, which would be a pretty good idea. The reality in our system of government, first lesson you learned back in DC is that you need 50% of the people plus one in order for anything to endure. And the notion of preserving something for future generations, if the current living generation doesn't see any value in it, will fail. And so we've got to find a way to make sure that the current living generation cares enough. They don't have to always, go in, but the ones who in my experience, the folks who will really fight for wilderness were those people who have slept on the ground in wilderness. That's where your depth of support comes in. You can put a poll in the LA Times and say, do you love wilderness and wish there was more of it? 95% of the people said, yes, we love wilderness and wish there was more of it. But when it comes to fighting for it, The people who have actually been there and slept on the ground under the stars are the ones who will care when it comes time for making tough choices.
And another important thing is not many people have talked about the fact that we still have some states in our country that do not have wilderness. And we really need to reach out to folks in those states, the youth, and make sure they get those wilderness experiences. Another awesome program that we have a group called the Idaho Group, which is Iowans coming to Idaho to the wilderness, because Iowa is one of those states that doesn't have wilderness. And we have a group of high school students that come out every year and spend a week in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness doing a project for us and just immersing themselves in the wilderness. And again, just their lives are changed.
All right, well, that's the end of the panel today. So let's give our speakers and yourselves a round of applause.